It's a whole mindset shift and really kind of focusing on the bigger picture instead of just like the tasks at hand and looking at it like there are things that are always going to happen that are tasks at hand, but where can I hand some of those things off to other people? I've gotten a lot better over the last year at not saying no, but not saying yes to everything at the same time. Instead of saying no, I'll figure out a way to do it, but I'll generally figure out a way for somebody else to do it. So I don't have to do all the little things every step of the way. And that's, I think, been a big unlock for my time to help you more that way. But being able to like pass some of those things off to other people has let me step up into that more strategic thinking, I guess, to look at a broader spectrum of what we're doing.
What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Carrot Cast podcast, the podcast with a funny name but a big mission. We help thousands of real estate investors and agents grow rock-solid mindsets, do better marketing so that you can build a business of freedom and impact. I'm your host, Trevor Mock. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, Jen, we're back. We're back, and everyone tuning in on the video side of it. Guys, this is part two. This is part two of a video, a session that Jen and I did. My executive assistant, Jen, celebrated our 10-year together this last year.
November,
which is crazy.
Yes.
And the other video that we did 3 years ago has almost 20,000 views on it. And Jen's like, that's my favorite thing to be in front of camera. So we're bringing her back for a second one. But the main thing is here, guys and gals, is being with me over 10 years as my executive assistant. Things evolve and things change, right?
Big time.
As my role changes, your role changes as well. And we've had a lot of changes over the past 3 years. And so as we were looking at how can we add value to the community even more, and so many of our clients too are growing their businesses. And every time they come to Carrot Camp, we're like, you need an executive assistant. And then we always hear after people leave Carrot Camps, they go, one of my favorite sessions was sitting down with Jen and being able to hear how we interact and what we do and what those processes are. So we thought it'd be an amazing opportunity to bring Jen back on, and we're going to dive into some more questions and you see how things have evolved, see what our day or our week looks like now, what our challenges have been, because we've had some challenges as well. And before we dive in and introduce you to Jen, if you guys haven't watched the first session, go watch the first one first, check it out in the video below. But before we dive in, we're doing something called the Carrot Summit. And we're going to be diving into this topic in a really deep way as well on the Carrot Summit. So go to carrotsummit.com. That's carrotsummit.com. If you're listening to this anytime during the year, you'll be able to find that page and get the recordings of this session with Jen, or show up live at the end of March 2022. Show up live. If you're listening to this in a future year, you can still get the recordings of that other session. But Jen, why don't you kind of introduce yourself a little bit before we dig in, for people who haven't watched the first session or who don't know you yet?
Yeah. So I've been, like you said, I've worked with you as your assistant for 10 years. I was originally brought in to do like blog post editing stuff. So it was not the intention that I would be in this role. And was working like 5 hours a week or something at that time. And then we transitioned to me working full time in less than 6 months. And it's just been awesome. I mean, it's been really exciting because back then we were doing so many different projects, working in so many different businesses, to evolve into this whole new dynamic with Carrot, and then changing into this role that we have, that I have now. And I absolutely love my job. To be able to help so many other people, it's feels like fulfilling a purpose, I guess, to be able to be out there and, like you were talking about, talking to the Carrot campers and stuff like that. It's totally a thing I love to do. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. 3 kids. Wow.
I was going to say, where'd the
other
one go?
3 kids. That was a 2 also. My brain is not here apparently. And I'm married, newly married husband, married in February of last year. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And it's just, that's kind of me.
I love it. And to give a little bit of context for her role too, guys, when Jen started with me, it was just a one-man show. I don't think we were doing anything at that point.
No.
Patrick, my business partner in the previous company, he was across the country.
Yeah.
You and I were here. And then as the companies grew, now we have 54 employees at Carrot. We're running multiple real estate projects downtown that you were helping in some way, shape, or form, and like everything in my world. And we're an 8-figure year business now at this point. So being able to grow all the way from an executive assistant to a guy who was just her and him, to now 50 plus people,
Yeah.
multi-million dollar year business. How do we do that? How do we get there? And what are the stumbling blocks along the way? So the biggest thing I want to touch on is we dove in really deep in the first session on, how we came together, where I found you, what were the challenges we had up to then. And we're not going to go over any of that, guys and gals. I want you guys to go check out the other video first. It's really, really thorough. We're going to kind of pick it up from 3 years ago to today. The growing past 10 million a year in revenue, growing from 20 something employees to 50 plus employees, and how both of our jobs have changed since then. But I want to kind of toss over your way, just really, really high level. What are some of the biggest changes in the past 3 years with your job as we went from 20 something employees to 50 plus?
For sure.
And my role completely changed, and so did yours. What were some of the ones that jump out to you?
Yeah. So back then, way back 3 years ago, I was doing so many more. I mean, there was a lot of just any like kind of one-off things that had to happen within the company kind of just fell back onto me. I mean, we made jokes for years about how that's kind of how I became HR for a long time. Yep. That it just happened one day that we got a letter from the state that said I was HR. So we were like, okay, that's Jen. She's HR now. And it just became that way. And I was kind of doing that. And now we actually have an HR person. So and the people team leader, and having somebody in that role, like running that, being able to take a lot of that, benefits and stuff like that off of my lap to be able to focus more on things to help you, get further. Those kind of things, running events. Like, I mean, then 3 years ago, all events, everything was all on me. I did all the work. We didn't really have committees or teams around any of that. And now I've helped build out a lot of teams around running events, like successfully running events and I still get to be involved in all those things because they were all things I've liked to do. Yep. So I'm still part of those, but it's not just on me to do that, which has been really cool, to still be a part of those teams, but not have to do all the work. There's just a lot of that. Like, it's not just assumed that Jen is going to take all the kind of things that fall down. Like it's been really cool to be able to focus more on higher level things and find ways that I can plug in to do more higher level focus things to keep you at a place where you need to be, and to be able to kind of grow myself that way also.
So it's been an interesting balance, right? Like you're saying, on one side of it's kind of being the collection of any tasks that I didn't want to do or couldn't do or whatever. And now we're going to talk about it here in a little bit, but now like moving more strategic, right? How are we moving from just task-based or mainly task-based and project-based to strategic as well? And it's a tricky transition. It is, but there's some new processes we put in place, some new things that we've started to do that you kind of have to do as the EA, the executive assistant, is moving into more of a strategic thinking role. Yeah. But there's still a lot of stuff that just comes up where it's like, Jen, I need help with this. Yeah. And it could be ordering lunch for stuff, or, getting their permit to do the dump stuff like we did today. Or yesterday we had a bunch of flooring, 7,000 pounds of flooring that got dropped off for one of our downtown renovation projects. And we needed space in front of the building. And Jen goes out there and gets cars moved and puts orange cones blocking off two full parking spots in the middle of our downtown.
All day long.
And I got the cones on the way home. I'm like, where are those cones out there? And Carly's like, oh shoot, I forgot to get them. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff too. But on the flip side of it, strategic. So what are some of the things that you can think of that have changed in our kind of our working cadence, our processes, things like that?
Yeah, there's been a lot. I think that we do a lot more focus. I know in our other podcast that we did, we talked a lot about the importance of communication and really diving into why it's really important that when you have an assistant that you spend that extra time having those conversations early on. You and I are really susceptible to not having those, to letting them kind of fall back and to say like, oh, let's just schedule over this. But even if we end up having to miss a meeting, we still make sure we connect every week, several times throughout the week, pretty much every day, that we are in pretty much constant communication and like sync with each other to know, I know what you're doing all the time. And I think that's really important. So I think keeping that in mind, it's also been really helpful to focus more around the things that, looking at things like in a more broad spectrum. So when we have our meetings, it's not focused so much on the like tasks at hand. Like these are the things we have to do. We're also looking ahead instead of thinking like, okay, I've got to check these items off my list. We're focusing more on like the future, even if it's the future as far as a week out. Yeah. We also look like a month out and really talk about, these things are coming up. We've got these events coming up and we've got these projects going on, and where do you need to plug in and who do we need to talk to, and how can I help pull these things out of your head and onto paper or whatever it is, but looking at those things on a more broad spectrum level. I think that that's a big part of it.
100%. And I don't remember when it was that we implemented this, but we've always done a Monday call, and then we started a Friday call together, or if we couldn't get together in person, we'd do something on Friday. And the cadence was like, we would hope that I would come onto the Monday call with some level of priority for the week using my goal and habit tracker. So if you guys want that, it's carrot.com/habits. That's carrot.com/habits is the really simple non-techie spreadsheet that we use every week. And even now every day to really make sure that we're staying on task with the right high priority stuff. But we would hope that I would bring that in. And then we would get to the end of the week. And this is even a year ago, maybe, right? We would get to the end of the week and I go, oh my gosh, just feel like I did a million things, but I don't feel like I did the right things.
Yes.
And you can get away with that, especially when you have a smaller team, because even just a couple of the right things can drive the ball forward a lot. But when you have 40, 50 employees and you have a whole suite of managers and directors, and it gets harder because now they're relying on me to set priority well. And if I don't set priority well, the wrong priority or lack of clarity in priority trickles down to the rest of the org. And so I think that's really where it got real to me, was when we started to have a full suite of directors at the company. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I need to be a better leader for them to show up with better priority, which then that highlighted when we would hop on those Mondays. I'm like, Jen, I just need help with this, and your number one job every week. And we even had this conversation, like, let's just set the contract with each other that your number one job is to make sure that the having goal trackers filled out on Monday. And if it isn't, that none of us can do anything until it is. And walk people through kind of how you started to take ownership over that process and how it's been working better so far.
So for us, we went through so many different variations of that, like trying to figure out the best way to make that work. I feel like finally now we just in the last even 2 months, I think really got into like the swing of like making that as effective as it can be. And I mean, I say that, but I think honestly we can still improve it. But really coming into that meeting with a full agenda, which I've always had. I mean, for the last several, like probably 5-6 years, I've come into those meetings with a full agenda, but really coming out with like a plan to think of it more strategically and looking at it more as like, versus me saying like, here is just a list of tasks that I have to do or I need you to do. We're looking at it like, okay, let's talk about what your plan for the week is. And here is like, we'll review what your habit tracker showed last week and see if any of that stuff needs to get pulled forward, and actively pulling up the habit tracker on both of our computers, and where, one of us or both of us is taking notes into the habit tracker during the meeting to make sure that if you decide you don't want to do it this week, that I'm going to still make sure it's going to get filled out, and I'm going to go through and fill it out with you. And really talking through what that looks like. I mean, I think even this week we had a meeting and you were kind of like I don't remember. I think it was like you weren't at your computer the right way or something and you couldn't pull it up. And so you just kind of sent me through a bullet point notes of your habit tracker. And you're like, these are the items that are probably important for the week. Let's focus on these. So I made sure that we went through and kind of formulated them better into your habit tracker so that they're there so you can actually see them and review them for the week, and we can talk about them later. And
that's been a big deal for me because, what that habit tracker, priority tracker, I was just thinking about that. I kind of eliminated the habit part, and I might start calling it the priority tracker because that's kind of what it does now. But in that habit tracker, we basically break it out. Here's the five most important commits that I have for the month, for the week, and then for the day. And Jen comes in on Mondays, and that's her number one thing is either look at my priority tracker that I hopefully had already filled out by that time, but many times it's not already filled out or it's halfway. And then she'll hop on and we're just sitting there going, okay, let's look at the company goals for the month. Let's look at our OKRs for the quarter. Let's look at those important projects and what do we need to get done? Or if it's this week, we then look at the top 5 for the month and we set a red, yellow, green on Mondays and Fridays. And that's been really helpful having Jen step in and really own that process. Because now I think this is one big change I want to toss over to you, see how you felt with it. The biggest change was it felt like the interaction with that priority tracker was me bringing it in to help find things for you to do. And not there wasn't a lot of work to do, obviously, but now it's more like that tool is just as much for Jen as it is for me versus my tool.
For sure.
And that's been really, really helpful. And doing the red, yellow, greens, because that's one thing that Jen brought into it as well is is on that Monday, like she said, looking at the week before, marking red, yellow, green. Did we get done those 5 commits for the week before?
Yeah.
And if there's more yellows or reds than greens, we ask why. And then we look at the calendar, things like that. I want to toss over to you, Jen. So that's another process I think we've improved a lot, is that calendar part of it. So once we nail the priorities, then we look at calendar. What are some things that you do as EA for me, once the priorities are set, to make sure the calendar supports the priorities?
For sure. So I know weekly, one thing we together do, because there are a lot of things I do on my own, but together, one thing we do in those meetings, whether it's our Monday meeting or our Friday meeting, typically we do this on Friday more, is that when we review the week coming up, we talk about items that are likely going to land in priorities and try to see where meetings that maybe you're scheduled to be on, or calls, or like whatever it is that you're scheduled to be in that maybe you don't need to be in, and really gauging the priority around those things to see if maybe you're just finding your way into a project that you don't necessarily need to be a part of, that you can find your way out of. And that's been a really big thing, I think, too, to unlock more of your time. And it's been kind of fun to like dig in to find that, and to kind of push you a little bit, to give a little bit of pushback, I guess, to say like, is this something that you actually need to be doing? Do we need to make sure that like, is this really where your focus needs to be this week? And you told me you wanted, 2 hours for this, but now you're suddenly involved in these 3 projects, and that makes no sense to me.
It never happens.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like talking about those kind of things and finding more opportunities to open up more time. So I think that is a big one right there for calendar stuff. But I think but then also just going through and making sure that, we have a lot of set parameters around what certain days are supposed to look like. And we're really working on part of that right now with the but no meetings by before 11 o'clock thing, and like kind of shifting things to make sure that you have more focused time and the ability to really dive into those important things that are on the priority tracker that you haven't had. Look at that. I just changed the branding right on point. I like it. And like going through and making sure that we get those time blocks in for you to focus on those things that are on that list, because otherwise the schedule, I mean, as most people that need an assistant probably know, it's easy to find time to do things that you don't have to do, but it's really difficult to find time for the things that need to be done, and really making sure that you block out that time to do that. And sometimes you're not great at that, but that's where I can come in and help find those opportunities for you to block that time out.
And even some of the stuff. So Jen, why don't you kind of walk through what we do now with those calendar deals? So let's say something gets put on the calendar, or I'm invited to it, or it's a focus time. What have we done to make sure that when I show up to that meeting, that it's effective time actually in the calendar invite and stuff?
So, there are several things we do depending on the type of meeting it is. If it's physically in person, obviously, then it's going to change things. But if you're, like let's say it's a Zoom call, then we make sure that there's links to the calls obviously in there, and there's everything that you'll need. Whether it's like documents or anything like that you'll have to be able to review, like, things that you would find in Drive or in Confluence or wherever, that we would be able to have links back to anything that you need to open to reference during that. And then a solid agenda built out. And it's really important. Typically, I tend to kind of push that back onto whoever's inviting you to meetings and say, and even if sometimes we invite people to meetings and they know what the meeting's about, I'll still sometimes push it back to them and say, hey, can you go ahead and make this agenda for this call and send that my way? And then I'll make sure that it gets plugged in and you guys are ready to roll and know exactly what you're talking about. But then I make sure that anything that you need is ready for it. Like you had the call, we started doing those Q&A calls yesterday. And I don't even know if you saw this, but I actually created a document for you to be able to run through with each team member that was on that call to take notes. And I'm telling you this because I don't think you noticed it. And I want to make sure that you do for the next one. No, cool. So there are notes section in there so that you can actually have like action items and commitments listed out right there. And then everything that person kind of said, because it's around like, things that went well and things that didn't go well, or things like bottlenecks they saw in the company or whatever. And then you can go through and you can take notes right in there. And I think having things like that, like sections, even for note taking or whatever it is, available to you just at a click makes it way more convenient and easy for you to be more effective in those situations.
I love it. And guys, there's so many of those little things, and a lot of those are what we're going to be going over on the summit. So go to carrotsummit.com. But I want to kind of make the shift towards the strategic, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges that we've had and how we've had to grow through some of those hard challenges. So I remember about a year ago, we had like a really, really tough conversation, and we'll cliffhanger that and come back to that in a second. But what's that move from kind of tactical to strategic that you have had to make as EA, and you've actually kind of driven some of that as well. So what does that mean? What does it mean to focus more strategically?
So I think for you, looking at your role, there were so many different things that were kind of pulling you back into the weeds.
Yeah.
And so for you having to step up into that, to be past that, to like get above that, to have more of a higher level focus, I had to be there too. And that was it's tricky because there are still so many things, like you said before, there are still so many things that I, as an assistant, have to be able to step back and still do, like, putting cones out on the street or whatever. But so I still have to be able to be flexible and like able to adapt to those kind of situations, but still also looking ahead and planning around, things that could get more tricky, I guess, to plan for future. And I think that just, it's a whole mindset shift and really kind of focusing on the bigger picture instead of just like the tasks at hand and looking at it like there are things that are always going to have to happen that are tasks at hand, but where can I hand some of those things off to other people? I don't have to like it. I've gotten a lot better over the last year at not saying no, but not saying yes to everything at the same time. Instead of saying no, I'll figure out a way to do it, but I'll generally figure out a way for somebody else to do it. So I don't have to do all the little things every step of the way. And that's, I think, been a big unlock for my time to help you more that way. Thinking more strategically. And I think as an assistant, it's always easy to take on all those little things and just go with it. It's going to take me 10 minutes. It's going to take me 25 minutes. It's not a big deal. I'll just do it. But being able to like pass some of those things off to other people has let me step up into that more strategic thinking, I guess, to look at a broader spectrum of what we're doing.
Because when your time is so consumed with the randomness of stuff, it is hard to go up to that level of looking at the priority tracker as an example on your Monday or every day and going, okay, cool. If these are Trevor's priorities for the month or for the week, how do I use those to then shape my schedule for this week? Or how do I ensure that the mission is for us together as a unit to get those done? And I think that's probably one of those biggest shifts that we have gone through, and we're still going through parts of it too, of making sure that me and Jen are not thinking about her role as like the catcher, the one that's just catching stuff that I throw at her and then she gets to go do. There's a part of it, but part of it also is being really proactive to go out there and create action on the priority, move on the priority, and ensure that I'm not letting things get in my own way or get distracted, which I tend to do quite a bit too. And there's a lot of cool things that are working with that. So let's talk about some of the challenges now. So in the first podcast that we did, we dove into some of the challenges that we had early on, where just lack of clarity, communication, which is always a challenge for us to work through.
It's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, it has. And we can talk about some of the tools we're using now, even just this past month or two, that seem to be working pretty good.
Yeah.
I think they're working pretty good.
I think so too.
But around a year and a half ago, especially as the company grew a lot and a lot more pressure got on my shoulders and revenue grew in the company, that's when I had to grow insanely quickly. And sometimes I wasn't aware of what I was doing, to those around me during that phase. And also I wasn't an amazing coach during a lot of those, or recognizing where I needed to coach better, or provide opportunity. But let's kind of walk through some of those challenges. What are some of the biggest ones over the past 3 years where like, man, we had to work through this and it wasn't easy?
Yeah. Well, obviously, and this is, I say obviously because you know this, but 3 years, like just 2.5 years ago, I lost my husband in an accident, and the transition through that was really difficult, like trying to figure out how to even function in regular life, let alone do like a job like this. And, and then there's even like questions, is this what you really want out of life? And those kind of things coming through it. And then finding like the swing back into, I think to be better at the role than I was before. And that's the interesting thing, is that the focus I had around it was like a totally different thing, because then I was looking at more, branching out in a different direction, like with assistant groups and that. And I still am passionate about helping other assistants, but on a different level. And I think that just being able to help people have better relationships with their assistants is a really cool thing, and needs to be, like you said, communication, the struggle with so much communication early on, really helping people alleviate some of that is really good. And so, that was one big thing, obviously. And then COVID, like with COVID happening, it affected everybody's role in the whole world. So there was a lot of that. So those two things in general made things just difficult for us all the way around in the first place. But then going into, the massive growth of Carrot at the same time, and shifting like towards growth just on every level was just, it was a lot. And I honestly, I mean, I know you know this, but I was having trouble keeping up.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. Like there was just so much around that. And that's why, like you just said a little while ago, we had, to have some really difficult conversations because there was a lot of just, I think there was a good period of time where, I almost hate saying this, like you lost faith in me, but it was because I lost faith in me. There was a lot of that. Like it was a confidence level on both sides. Like there was a lot of struggle with my own confidence and me feeling like I could be good at my job again. Trying to figure out who I was. I mean, there was a lot of that and like just really struggling there. So I think that coming through that changed a lot. And it really shifted my whole mindset. I mean, around what I actually want out of this role and how I can be better at this job than I was before. Yep. And I think that was a big part of it. So
yeah, we over the last few years we've read Radical Candor as a company. I think we still send that out to all new employees. Yep. And then there's this past year we've been talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team book quite a bit. And looking back on, let's say a year and a half ago or so, during that period where you were still trying to find your feet, like you said, and trying to find kind of who is Jen in this next phase of her life after the accident. And it was an interesting and tricky dynamic all around for all of us, and especially you. And during that time, it's like, as a leader, I want to support the heck out of her as much as I possibly can. But there's things that still got to get done. Right. And I think what happened on my end, and this is hopefully a learning lesson for any CEOs watching this or assistants watching this as well, is I let it go too long without having the hard convo. Yeah. And so when you, and vice versa, probably. Oh, yeah. Right. So when you let that go too long, at the top of the 5 dysfunctions pyramid is results. Like, what result are you hoping to get? It could be a goal, a number, it could just be an interaction, whatever the outcome is you're trying to go for. Sure. And if you're not getting that result, you have to go all the way back down to the bottom of it, which is trust. Is there trust? The way to gauge whether there is trust is if you're fully comfortable to have the really hard conversations. We're mining for conflict. Yep. And
we weren't at that point.
Exactly.
We weren't. And that's funny because, I mean, being, in our relationship for 8 years, we had many times had hard conversations, but our whole dynamic changed. And that was really, it was weird. And so, but having that conversation, I mean, that was like 8 months ago, I think 8 or 9 months ago at this point that we finally had that conversation. And it was a game changer. Yep. I mean, like, I think it totally changed everything. And I don't think that in the 10 years that we've worked together, that we've ever had as comfortable of a relationship as we do now. Like, I think that I feel more comfortable coming to you and knowing like where I stand with you. And I think hopefully vice versa, that we can have these conversations much more easily and candidly than we've ever been able to. And I really appreciate that.
100%. And that's the thing, like, it goes down to the trust in the bottom of the 5 dysfunctions. I mean, Jen runs my email. She literally has access to my bank account. She sends out my wires. Like, I trust her. Right. But there was that other part of it going up there, which was I think it was on accountability on the 5 dysfunctions, which is, if a certain result isn't happening the way that you want, sometimes you kind of inadvertently lower the bar. And that had happened, subconsciously for me after the accident. So I'm like, I don't want to be a jerk.
Yeah. And overweight. I think there was like a not wanting to put too much on me. I think a lot of people in the company kind of were experiencing that same thing.
And you know what? Maybe that season was exactly what we needed too, because I don't think we could have, or it wouldn't have been the right thing to expect the same out of you. But the cool thing was, I remember a conversation vividly where I'm like, oh man, I can't lower the bar for her because that's not good for her either. Yeah. And there were projects that maybe I wouldn't send you, or that you're amazing at all this other stuff, but we're trying to bring the level of projects that you work on up a couple notches. Yeah. And I'm not talking the quality in that respect. I'm talking like, rather than the majority of kind of onesie twosie things, let's really enable her to be able to do even more impactful things that I would normally just do myself. Yeah. And so I would delegate some off, and maybe the result wasn't what I was hoping, but I then didn't want to give you really good critical feedback or coaching on it. And I remember one day there was this one type of a project, and I had got some feedback from another team member of ours. I'm like, I can't not just have the conversation with Jen about it. And it was a simple thing, right? It was like the general formatting of certain docs. I'd love for you to be able to be good at this.
Did I cry afterwards?
Yeah, I'd love for you to be good at this. And I know you can be, but this is a challenge. Then I end up not delegating these to you. And this person doesn't delegate to you as well. And that's not good for any of us. And it was so cool because then she went and learned how to do it. And then we started making playbooks, and she comes back with a really well documented playbook. And she comes back with this other thing that's formatted well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where else am I not coaching well and giving my team members a shot and being candid with them to say,
totally,
okay, we missed the mark here. Here's kind of more where I'd like to be. I'd like it to come out, and what training do you need to get there versus like, that wasn't good. I'm just not going to send them that work anymore. That doesn't work for anybody.
No.
So that was one of those. And then I want to throw it back the other way, Jen, where you had the radical candor with me last year, which I'm sure that took a lot of guts.
Yeah, that was
so
intense.
Go into as much detail as you want on that, but kind of what happened there.
Yeah, well, I mean, so it started with, my review, and you had some feedback that did not feel or sit well with me afterwards. And I really struggled with how to deal with it. And part of me just felt like I was like, maybe I'm just like, terrible at my job and I shouldn't do this anymore. And, I was on the fence about like, if I should just leave because maybe I wasn't what you needed anymore. And like this whole thing. And finally we went to our company retreat, and I had already planned to talk to you about it, but it was like, kind of, I just kept like punting it down the road. Like I'll do it soon. And then the company retreat happened, and we had a lot of conversations around the 5 dysfunctions and this whole thing. And I was like, oh man, okay. Like I get it. I'm supposed to have this conversation. So, in my very manly fashion, I emailed you and sent you like a 75 paragraph long email about my feelings and where I was at and what was going on. But I also made it really clear in the email that I wanted to have a real conversation, but I just wanted to give you like a precursor to it. Like this is before we have this conversation, read through this, and then we can talk about this email. And then it was all written down. So then we can go through and like literally went through, and we had 2 hour-long conversations, really breaking down every single paragraph of that email and just talking about, maybe what you meant versus what I heard, and really diving into where I could improve and those things and why. And
where
it was just, And I mean, it was just how communication processes on both sides of everything could just get better. And they have so much since then. And it was just, it was a very, even afterwards, I think that after that first, because it was 2 separate days that we had those conversations. And it was like, after that first day, like we hung up because it was calls. We did them like virtually. And afterwards, I swear I thought I was going to throw up. Like I got off and I was just like, oh my gosh, it was so intense. It was crazy. And it was just like, it was so much, but it wasn't, it was so good though. Like it was definitely like, it was a relief, and I felt like better. I was like, oh my gosh, it was just still felt heavy because there was still so much sitting out there, and we didn't get to those other things and coming back to them afterwards. But afterwards, like after the whole conversation was done and it was finally like, we were back on the same page and like saw where we both were, it was definitely what we would call a clarifying conversation. I mean, it just opened up completely our whole relationship into a whole new dynamic. And it was really cool.
I'm with you. And that's the thing that I'm just insanely proud of you. And I think a lot of people watching this too, whether you're an EA or an employee or a boss somewhere that has an EA or doesn't, it's really easy to kind of fall into those traps of not having the really tough combos or not giving critical feedback or candid feedback. And then there's the nuance of how to give it the right way. Right. Because that was kind of the crux of that convo that I've learned from, and hopefully I never repeat some of those things there. But being able to have those combos can transform things. And I've had combos like that with other team members here where I love them, but you just get to a spot where you're like, oh my gosh, it's just not working. And rather than letting things blow up, have the hard conversation and do it in a loving way, accept the feedback that they're going to give you, or at least listen to it and then have a real conversation about it. But make sure that you're bringing those, constructive criticisms towards someone and do it in a loving way. And that's the thing. That's the key with it, I think, is I read this, I think it was in Radical Candor book or somewhere else, but if we have something that can truly help someone improve and we don't give that to them because we're afraid that we're going to hurt their feelings, or vice versa, that we don't want to have to go through that uncomfortable moment, we're actually doing them a massive disservice. And we have to ask our question, do we truly love that person as much as we said that we do? And if we're not willing to step into that hard feedback, we probably don't. Otherwise we would. Right. And so I'm glad that we did, and let's continue to do so. And it's been amazing
Totally.
since then. So just want to let you know, proud of you for that. And the growth that you've had along the way has been amazing. And it's crazy what happens, because when you see your EA step up like that and then really proactively want to learn and drive new things, and it just raises the confidence big time. And on the flip side of it, when you see the CEO, admit to needing to improve in certain ways, and working on adding and being a better, more clear communicator, and committing to certain habits that maybe made your job harder, then it can really help build momentum back the other way too.
Definitely.
And so that's been really cool.
I agree.
Proud of you.
A lot of cool things came out of that conversation too, though. I mean, like guiding back to that whole having more conversations and that's one thing too, is if in this role, it's really easy. I'm part of like a lot of assistant communities, and a lot of people talk about how, they support one exec, and they a lot of times get really frustrated when they're expected to do things for other executives within their company. But I think that that's such a bad way to look at that, because it's like, I don't necessarily like work for the other, leads in the company, but being able to step in and help them if I have the bandwidth, and growing those relationships. And that a lot came from that conversation, that we had a lot of big conversations about having that. And now quarterly, I do conversations with each of the directors in the company. And I mean, they don't hand a lot off to me, but when they do, they're, the trust is there, and that we have, and even if it's just conversations and things like that, they want to make sure that you are aware of or bring you into the loop on things and have more conversations with you. Building those relationships has been really important and really amazing over the last 6 months. And that's pretty cool.
That one's an awesome one. So let's spend a couple minutes on that. So that was one of those things where in 5 Dysfunctions, we talked about accountability and raising or lowering the bar, right? And I think as a leader, we've got to make sure that we're raising the bar for the people around us. And sometimes it's easy for us to kind of feel, oh my gosh, am I pushing the person too much? Or, are they capable of, oh shoot, I'm going to keep the bar here where they can get over it. And that's not good for anybody, because it makes your job harder as the leader, because now you don't feel like you can delegate or bring the higher level things to that person. But also even worse is you're keeping that person in a spot where that person can't grow, and you're like keeping them in that spot because you're not willing to dive in, or you don't know how to coach them there. And so one of those bar raising opportunities was, like you were talking, as we grew, before we had a suite of directors, it was you and me, right? And people would send stuff your way, but it's more of that Jen happened to be the process in this, that people would add it to Asana, and she's the one that got that done. But out of that was one of the things where, because of certain things that we had talked about on quality of certain output, that I had never actually dove in to coach with you or show you what a good output would look like. I just magically expected you to have it.
To know it.
And one of the things that happened was the leaders also had a lower bar. And so then I said, I know it's not you're capable of it. Can you now work and build relationship with them? And so the same way that we were doing it, having those good conversations, radical, candid conversations. And that was when I could tell you're nervous about at the start. Hey, Jen, I really want you to reach out and have conversations with every leader and ask them, where you can improve, where where you're doing good, the whole thing. And you did. And I think that really started to make things more amazing with them. And I heard great feedback from leaders after that too, where they're like, I feel like I can reach out to Jen now. And I feel like the quality, we can expect a better standard from it. And they've mentioned it to me many times. Awesome. Like, it just feels like it's changed. So,
well, and it's cool too, because there's definitely levels of like, even where we've discussed the idea of like down the line of me stepping into, meetings or things that you can't necessarily be on. So I'll step in your place, and having more engagement with them helps, I think, me being there more commonplace, I guess. So it's not as awkward if Jen steps into a meeting. Like if I just sit in on meetings and listen to meetings and nobody really needs to know or cares that I'm there, like it's just okay that Jen's there, and it's not awkward. Like, why is Jen here for this? It's not that way anymore, which I think is pretty cool also.
I like it. So I've got a couple ideas to kind of bring this to a close here in a bit. People are probably wondering, like, what are the things that you might do for me now that maybe a year, 2, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have delegated off? And I've got a couple I can think of, but I'm going to toss over to you first. Is there anything that you can think of that 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago was like, oh, he never would have delegated that to me, but you're doing now?
For sure. So like you mentioned already, Playbooks was a big one. Like that was a big thing that we would go through, and we can map a lot of that stuff out. Really just documentation of things in general, whether it's notes or, those kind of things, that we actually have created processes around formatting those things and creating those actual just whole documentation for everything we do at Carrot. So that's a big one. Also, man, even little things like, here's a good one. So when we were at, we had retreat. Yep. And was that on your list? Were you thinking
it was not, okay. No.
So we were at retreat and you had to do a presentation to the whole company in like an hour, and everyone was going to lunch. And I was home because we had COVID, so I had to stay home and wasn't able to go to the retreat. So when everyone else went to lunch, I was still working. And so he sends me a message and he's like, "Hey, can you put together this presentation that I have to give in 50 minutes?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can do that." And so I like put together this whole, it was like all the information was everywhere I needed. I mean, it was easy to put together. We've already built something pretty similar to it anyway, so it wasn't hard. But those things, you would never have done that 5 years ago.
That was
asked
a good
me to
one,
do
actually.
It. It was
that's a really good example because with that I've like locked in to think that I've got to do all this stuff, and in that moment, kind of what I was thinking about in that moment was, well, what is my unique genius in this? It's thinking of the content and the flow and how I'm going to guide people through a story. My unique genius is not putting that on slides. I hate it. Like, drains the energy out of me. I do not like it. I'd rather show up and just speak. And
to be clear, I like to do those things.
And she likes to do those things, right? And it's funny, at the last retreat, Alex and Chris, we did the incentive conversation, incentive plan conversation. And they're both like, "Oh my gosh, you have the slides ready for it?" I'm like, "Well, no, I would work better if I just had a couple slides and I talk." And they're like, "I would fall apart and I would not like that." I go, "I don't know. I would rather do that though. I'd much rather not have this big drawn out thing. And I want a few things to tell a story and cast a vision. And then literally the second before I say something is when I'm going to think about it. And then it just comes out and it's something that I'm okay at." So that was a really good one, because I just sent her a Voxer message that basically said, "Here's slide 1, should say this, a picture on this, slide 2. And then she built it and it was 99.999% exactly the way I wanted. That was awesome. Another one was taxes recently. So
oh my gosh.
I had a meeting with my CPA, or Jen had a meeting with my CPA on Tuesday last week. And I saw it in my calendar and there's stuff that I needed to get done. And I purposely scheduled something over the top of it that's a really high company priority. And I knew it was there, and I didn't let Jen know about it, that they're double scheduled. And it wasn't a test. It was just, I just didn't reach out to you and let you know.
Thanks.
And so then she noticed that, "Hey, there's double schedule here. You want me to move that thing that you put on there?" And I'm like, "No, that's really high priority. That needs to stay. Can you go to my appointment with the CPA with me, or instead of me?" And immediately said yes. And then at that point, I'm like, "Cool. Now what do I need to do to prepare her to do so?" Because I've always been the person who's always gone to the CPA. And I started thinking about it and going, well, I don't need to be there. I already know everything that Jeremy asks me every year. It's all the same stuff. Let me just tell Jen what he's going to ask you, and then let me give the answers and link up the documents. And then you come back with his questions.
And I linked up most of the documents, actually.
Yeah. And she already had them all. And then I go log into my tax folder, and she already has my tax folder duplicated because we have a playbook for it. Question for you. How did you get all those 1099 interest things, those documents?
Well, a lot of them come in the mail, and other ones get emailed to you. And I just uploaded them into the file and put them in there, so they'd all be there because I'm amazing.
So I was logging in.
Let's just say magic.
Seriously, I was logging into those accounts, like getting ready to download them in there that night. And I'm like, I looked in there, they're all already there. So go, okay, check that one off. That's a part of the process. She's
some of them I emailed other people and got them because we didn't have them and we needed them. But
so that's kind of stepping in that strategic stuff. And that's where I think if you're an EA watching this or CEO, that's where we want to get together as a unit, is having both people think strategically, what are the biggest priorities, but then also thinking 1, 2, 3 steps ahead. And I think in the early stages, as an EA, in the early stages of your role as well, it was a lot more of the CEO thinking ahead and the EA waiting for things to be
hand me stuff,
and which is fine, but it can't grow. That role can't grow unless you start to move towards thinking ahead, which has been really cool seeing that shift. Let's toss it out to you, Jen. You've been doing a lot of research, a lot of communicating with other people, learning about what a strategic executive assistant does. How do you see your role changing the next 3 years?
The role is going to evolve. I know it. I mean, just because of where you're going, it's going to evolve into way more out of the day-to-day, like simple item delegation things, like because we have so many processes built around so many things, and it seems like we're just constantly creating more processes there. And so there's a lot less surprises, I guess, like a lot less, like, I don't know why I would be, and this is a bad example, I guess, but I mean, like thinking about taxes, like this year, I think honestly, for the first time ever, it wasn't a surprise, you know, like, and that's dumb because it's like, it's always happened. But for some reason it was like, okay, like here's the process. We built this whole process out. Like I had everything in there way before I had the appointment made, way before I had everything in there that I could get. And I was gathering everything, you know, like the months leading up to it because I knew what we needed. And it was just, and so there's a lot more of that happening. And so, and it's going to continue to become more that way as time goes on. Also, I know that I tell you this all the time, but eventually we're going to have more assistants here at Carrot, and I'm going to help train them to be strategic assistants also, because I don't think that we need a whole troop of people that are just out doing all this, like, you know, in the weeds work. The other directors and team leads need people behind them that are able to help them think more strategically too. And so finding ways to guide the company that direction is also part of my plan for the future.
I love it. I love it. Well, guys, I'm sure you guys have questions. You can pop them in the comments box or whatever it is in YouTube. We'll answer them as much as possible. And if you're watching this immediately after we release it, go to carrotsummit.com and join us live on that. Ask questions that are specific to you. But I think the biggest thing, whether you're in the real estate industry, which is the clients that we serve, or not, I think the biggest thing is step into the change as a CEO that you need to make in order to help your EA grow, and don't do the things to keep the EA in that spot that because you haven't grown yourself. Vice versa, if you're an EA, make sure that you're finding ways to move into the strategic, looking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. Hold your CEO accountable to having their priorities set, and actually be a part of that process to ensure it can happen, because then you can do your job better. And also on both sides, just have those radical, candid conversations. Well, where you might think, well, shoot, the trust is there, which there is, but the ultimate trust for a person is, are you willing to have a hard conversation with them that may hurt both of you, one or both of you in some way, shape, or form, and or is hard for one or both of you in some way, shape, or form, but do it with the intent of love. So step into that, guys. And it's just been an amazing journey the last 10 years, but also the last 3 years has been a lot of ups, a lot of downs. And it's been really cool seeing you grow, especially the past year and a half, Jen.
You too.
Thank you. If you guys have questions, let us know. I can't remember if we have a resource. We have an executive assistant playbook that we'll probably be giving away at the summit. Let's go to carrotsummit.com and join us on that live, or check it out. And you guys, the playbook that we use every single month, week and day to do our best work together. Cool. Any parting words to the 75,000 people out there who are going to see this, Jen?
I think, like you had already said, for assistants, there's just, I think, speaking to assistants, I think that know that you can do the hard things, that push yourself a little further, a little harder. It's really easy to hold yourself back and say that, you know, you've never done something before, and you don't kind of encourage yourself to take that step forward to do those things. That it may be hard and you may never have done it, but you won't if you don't. So just step into it, because that's the only way you're going to grow.
I like it. Well, Jen, thank you. And we're going to book her again next week and the week after and the week after.
Forever.
Because it's her favorite thing to do.
Yes.
And guys, everybody, while you're here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're in the real estate industry especially, there's going to be so much information here for you to build a business, scale up your online lead gen, win back your time, and build a business of freedom and impact. If you're not, and you're new to us, and you found this specifically for the EA content, go check out the first episode that we'll link up in the show notes below, the description below, that gives you the entire first 7 years of how we grew during that time. If there's anything that we can help with, let us know. So guys, follow me on Instagram, Trevor.Mauch. That's Mauch. Do you want people to follow you?
No,
don't follow her.
I don't do anything exciting.
Don't follow her. All right, guys, have an amazing rest of the week, and talk soon.